The ink had smudged on the envelope, but Carolyn Hayes no longer needed to read the words. She had memorized them. Widowers seeks companionship, not perfection. Must love children. Not perfection. That line had wrapped around her heart like a promise, because she was far from perfect now. A widow, a mother, a woman who still woke in the night, reaching for a man buried beneath Tennessee soil. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, folded and refolded so many times the creases had softened. She touched it now, tucked safely in her satchel, beside a threadbare baby blanket she couldn't bear to part with. The train platform bustled around her, the air thick with steam and the scent of coal. Toby clutched her skirts, his small fingers digging into the fabric. At barely 5 years old, he had already learned the weight of loss, his laughter quieter than it should have been. "Be good for Mrs. Hendricks, all right?" Carolyn whispered, pressing a kiss to his tousled curls. Her neighbor gave her a reassuring nod, but Carolyn turned away before she could see the tears in Toby's eyes or the ones burning in her own. The train groaned as if it too carried grief in its iron bones. Yet it would take her west, toward something unknown, toward Montana, toward a man named James McAllister, a rancher, a widower, a stranger who had chosen her, of all people. As the locomotive lurched forward, Carolyn leaned against the window, watching the world blur into streaks of gold and green. The rhythmic clatter of wheels against tracks steadied her nerves, the vibrations humming through her body like a second heartbeat. She thought of Robert, his laughter, his calloused hands, the way he'd whisper her name in the dark like a secret. The last time they had made love, he had held her as if he already knew, as if he understood the world would take him from her too soon. She hadn't been touched since, not truly. Not in the way that made her skin sing. A sudden jolt sent her gasping, her gloved hand flying to her chest. When she looked up, a man across the aisle was watching her, not with the polite disinterest of a stranger, but with a slow, deliberate study. His gaze traced the line of her booted ankles, the curve of her waist, the pulse at her throat. Heat prickled across her skin. She shifted, her thighs pressing together, whether from discomfort or something deeper. She refused to name it. The train's vibrations seemed to sink into her bones, and she bit her lip, startled by the warmth pooling low in her belly. "Get a hold of yourself," she scolded silently. But for the first time in years, something inside her stirred, not for the stranger across from her. Not even for James McAllister, whose face she didn't yet know. No, it was for her, for the woman she had been before grief carved hollows into her soul, the woman who still remembered what it was to be wanted. As the train carried her toward the horizon, Carolyn exhaled, her breath fogging the glass. Somewhere beyond these tracks, a new life waited. And though she wasn't yet brave enough to hope, she whispered to the fleeting shadows of the past, "I'm still here." Montana greeted her with a cold that seeped into the marrow, the kind of chill that warned a body not to trust too easily. Caroline stepped off the train, her fingers tightening around the wool of her shawl. Dust swirled in the late afternoon light, and the platform stood nearly empty, save for one man. He leaned against a post, his hat pulled low, arms crossed over a chest that looked hewn from oak. No sign, no welcoming smile, yet she knew. James McAllister. The man looked as if the land itself had shaped him, all rough edges and quiet strength. When his gaze met hers, something flickered between them. Not warmth, not yet, but recognition. "You're early," he said, his voice like gravel smoothed by whiskey. She lifted her chin. "I can leave if it's a problem." A ghost of a smirk touched his mouth. "It's not."
He led her to a wagon worn by weather and work, its wooden boards silvered by time. The horse snorted as she climbed in, and the scent of pine from the firewood stacked in the back filled her lungs. They rode in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, like two people remembering how to breathe. She caught him glancing at her, first her hands, then her face, as if piecing together a puzzle he hadn't expected to care about. By the time the ranch came into view, twilight painted the mountains in violet and gold. The house stood plain but sturdy, its walls holding stories she wasn't yet part of. Dinner was stew, thick with beef and carrots, oversalted. She ate without complaint. James asked no questions, just watched her with a quiet intensity, as if she might vanish if he looked away. When their fingers brushed as he passed her a tin plate, they both flinched. His hands were rough, scarred, warm. The contact sent a spark through her, first to her chest, then lower. After clearing the dishes, she stepped outside. The night air bit at her skin, but the stars, they were endless. That's when she saw him. By the woodpile, shirtless. Moonlight silvered the sweat on his skin as he swung the axe with practiced ease, muscle flexed beneath the taut plane of his back with each movement. She knew she shouldn't stare, knew it was improper. Yet she couldn't look away. Her thighs pressed together of their own accord, heat pooling low in her belly. The sensation shocked her, this sudden, alive feeling, this wanting. He turned, as if sensing her gaze, but said nothing, just wiped his brow with the back of his hand and split another log. Caroline retreated inside, her pulse fluttering like a bird against glass. In the guest room, she sat on the edge of the bed, fingers clutching the quilt. It's too soon, but her body hummed in disagreement. And her heart? It hadn't raced like this in years. The wind screamed through the cracks in the cabin walls, a sound so raw it could have been ripped from Caroline's own chest. Thunder shook the sky as James slammed the last shutter closed. Rain came down in sheets, turning the world beyond the windows into a blur of gray and silver. "Ain't no way you're riding back in this," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Trail'll be mud by now." She didn't argue. The cabin groaned around them, the fire spitting embers onto the hearth. The air smelled of damp wool and wood smoke, thick with something unspoken. One room, one bed, two people trying not to notice how loudly their hearts were beating. James poured whiskey into a tin cup and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, just a fleeting touch, but enough to send heat skittering up her arm. "Why'd you answer that ad?" he asked suddenly, his voice rough over the storm. The whiskey burned her throat, but not as much as the truth. "Because I was tired of being lonely," she admitted. "Tired of pretending I didn't wake up aching for someone who wasn't there." His gaze darkened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "My wife bled out," he said, the words like stones dropped between them. Burying her was one thing. Burying the baby with her? His jaw tightened. "Didn't touch a woman after that. Didn't want to." Caroline's breath caught. "And now?" His eyes locked onto hers, fierce and unguarded. "Now I don't know what I want, but you being here, it's making me remember things I shouldn't." She stood, the blanket slipping from her shoulders as she stepped toward him. Her pulse hammered, but her voice was steady. "I haven't been touched in 2 years, not like that, and I'm so damned tired of feeling like half a person." The air between them crackled. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't sweet. It was hunger and heat and years of loneliness crashing into each other. His hands gripped her waist, hers twisted in his shirt, the blanket pooled at their feet, forgotten. He backed her against the mantel, his mouth hot on hers, his body pressing her into the wood. She gasped when his hands slid lower, gripping her backside, pulling her flush against him. The hardness of him against her hip made her moan, the sound swallowed by his kiss. Her fingers traced his jaw, then slipped under his shirt, seeking skin. He tore away like she'd burned him. "I can't," he rasped, stepping back, chest heaving. Caroline stared at him, lips swollen, body throbbing. The firelight flickered over his face, shadows carving out the guilt in his expression. He turned away, fists clenched. "I'm sorry." The apology hung between them, sharp as a blade. It wasn't rejection that hollowed her chest. It was the cruel reminder. She'd just remembered what it was to feel alive. And now she had to remember how to stop.
Days passed, and the space between Caroline and James grew thick with the weight of what almost happened. Every glance, every graze of skin sparked like flint to dry wood, but no fire came. He avoided her now, not obviously, but she noticed. When she walked into the barn, he walked out. When she reached for a dish, he moved away like her fingers might set him ablaze. It was as if her presence hurt him, as if desire had become a punishment. So she started teasing fate. She bent over longer when reaching for flour, let her hand linger on his arm a second too long when passing coffee, let her skirts ride just a little higher when climbing the ladder to dust the rafters. Nothing scandalous, but nothing innocent either. He saw it. She knew he did. His jaw would clench, his throat would bob, but he never said a word. Until the dress. It was late afternoon, and Caroline had found the cedar chest in the spare room, dusty, locked. But curiosity was louder than her guilt. Inside, folded dresses, bonnets, and a lavender-scented memory of a woman gone too soon. She knew it was a bad idea, but she wanted to know what kind of woman he loved, wanted to see if maybe he could love her too. The blue gingham dress fit like a glove, modest neckline, tight bodice, soft against her skin. She stood before the cracked mirror, brushing her fingers over the lace collar. The door creaked open. James. His eyes locked on hers, then drifted downward, slow, disbelieving. The air in the room shifted, heavy and electric. Caroline froze. He didn't let her finish. In 2 strides he was in front of her, one hand on her hip, the other at the back of her neck. His lips crashed into hers, raw, consuming. She gasped, and he deepened it, pressing her into the wall like he needed her to breathe. His hands roamed, sliding up her thighs, lifting the hem of the dress. His mouth moved down, jawline, throat, collarbone, his breath hot and wild against her skin. Caroline moaned, arching into him, her body on fire, heart galloping. Then he stopped. Again. Pulled back like he'd been slapped. "Damn it," he muttered, turning from her like a storm rolling away. Caroline stared, lips parted, chest rising and falling. Her voice was low, trembling with fury. "Stop touching me if you're not going to have me," she snapped. "I'm not some flame you can warm your hands on when you're cold, James. I'm not your dead wife. I'm me, and I deserve more than half a man who's scared of wanting." She stormed out, her bare feet echoing on the wooden floor, leaving him alone in the room, hands shaking, breath shattered. The heat lingered, but now it burned with frustration. And a fire, once teased, doesn't wait forever.
The storm outside had nothing on the one inside the cabin. "You keep pulling me close just to push me away," Carolyn said, voice trembling, not from fear, but from fury, barely restrained. "Do you want me, James, or are you just too afraid to admit it?" James stood rigid by the hearth, his face lit in flickers by the fire. Shadows danced across his jaw, making his silence feel like a punishment. "You're not her," he said finally, low, guttural. "You'll never be her." Carolyn's breath hitched like she'd been slapped. "I know that. I was never trying to be." She grabbed her shawl off the chair, hands tight with frustration. The scent of wood smoke and stew still hung in the air, but it felt cold now, sterile, like even the warmth in the room had turned its back. "I'll leave in the morning." James didn't stop her, didn't move. The cabin door slammed behind her as she stepped into the night, rain slicing through the dark in angry sheets. Her boots squelched through the mud as she made her way to the barn, anywhere to breathe. Lightning cracked in the sky. She didn't see him until she turned to shut the barn door behind her. He was standing there, soaked to the skin, breathing hard like he'd run straight through the storm. His shirt clung to his body, transparent now, outlining every muscle, every scar. Raindrops slid down his face, over lips parted as if about to speak, but he didn't. Instead, he crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and kissed her like a man coming undone. His mouth was hot despite the chill, tasting of whiskey and rain. His hands were rough and unsteady, framing her face, then sliding down, gripping her hips like they were the only thing tethering him to earth. Carolyn gasped against his mouth as he pressed her back against the barn wall. The scent of damp hay, horses, and rain-soaked leather surrounded them. The wooden beams creaked with every shift of his weight, every deepening kiss. "James," she whispered, but he swallowed it, mouth trailing to her neck, his breath warm against her skin. Her dress was soaked and heavy, but it didn't matter. He bunched it up around her waist, and she wrapped her legs around him without thinking. Her back scraped lightly against the barn wall. The sensation grounded her, made it real. His hands, God, his hands, one at her thigh gripping tight, the other tangled in her hair. She could feel the tension in his body, like he was holding back a dam about to break. "I thought I forgot how to feel," he rasped against her collarbone. "Then you walked in and ruined all my silence." "Then ruin me," she breathed, pulling him closer. They moved together, rough and raw, the damp fabric between them no match for the heat building fast and hard. She moaned his name like a litany, his hips driving into her with urgent rhythm, hay sticking to her thighs, her fingers clawing his back. It wasn't polished, it wasn't planned. It was real, unforgiving, cathartic. When it was over, they collapsed into the hay, tangled, breathless. His lips still against her temple, her hand pressed to his chest where his heart beat like a war drum. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The rain softened outside, but inside, something wild and wounded had finally been set free. The morning light slid in gently through the cracks in the barn walls, soft and golden, like it knew not to disturb them. Caroline stirred first, her cheek resting on James's bare chest, the rise and fall of his breathing steady beneath her. One of his hands rested at her lower back, warm and heavy. The other slowly traced circles on her hip with his fingertips, lazy and unhurried, like he wasn't ready to let her go, and maybe never would be. The scent of hay, sweat, and something sweeter, like promises kept, lingered thick in the air. She smiled against his skin. "You awake?" she whispered. James's voice rumbled beneath her. "Been awake. Just didn't want to ruin this." Caroline propped herself up slightly, letting the blanket slide down her back. "Ruin what?"
He looked at her, eyes soft, lips tugging into the smallest smile. "The first morning I didn't wake up alone, and didn't want to." Her breath caught. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he said them, they landed. He ran his hand through her hair, pulling her down gently to kiss her, slow, open-mouthed, full of everything left unsaid. Their bodies didn't move like the night before. This was different, unrushed, sensual, deep. She sighed into him, curling closer. The kind of closeness that says, "I'm here, I'm staying." Eventually, they made their way back to the house, wrapped in borrowed clothes and stolen glances. The kitchen smelled like coffee, wood smoke, and fresh eggs. James stood shirtless at the stove, flipping cornbread in a cast-iron pan, humming under his breath. Caroline watched him from the doorway, heart swelling in a way that felt dangerous and real. Then came the small voice. "Ma?" Toby stood at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes, his curls wild and his feet bare. Caroline crouched and opened her arms. He ran into them with the force of a cannonball. James turned, wiping his hands. "Morning, Toby." The boy looked up at him, blinking, then, casually, as if it had always been true, said, "Morning, Pa." The word hit like a thunderclap in a quiet field. James froze. Caroline stilled, unsure of what would happen next. But James knelt slowly and placed a hand on Toby's shoulder, eyes shining. "Hey there, kiddo." He swallowed hard and looked up at Caroline. She smiled through the tears building behind her lashes. She walked over, leaned down, and pressed a kiss to his cheek, soft and sure. No vows were exchanged, no grand declarations, but something had been sealed just the same. Later, while Toby played with wooden blocks near the fire, James and Caroline sat close on the porch bench, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, hers looped around his waist. Their bodies fit like puzzle pieces, like they were always meant to find one another, even if it had taken a lifetime and a few scars. "Think this is the part where we start fresh?" she asked, leaning into him. James kissed the top of her head. "No, this is the part where we keep going, together." The sun rose higher, casting golden light over the ranch. It wasn't a perfect morning, but it was theirs. And that was enough.